certainly give you an idea of what's happening. So I'm here wearing a number of hats. One of them is, yes, I work for Unite, and yes, we support this action against, obviously, the TTIP agreement. I'm also here on behalf of a community campaign that's recently been set up in Staffordshire, and we've just changed our name to Cancer Not-for-Profit. And the reason that I'm here is that we've actually joined forces with a number of different trade unions, with religious groups, with community groups, and we're still looking for more. So if you know any, throw them our way, we'll have anybody. What's happening in Staffordshire is part of this encroaching issue of privatisation in the NHS. So some of you may be aware that the Health and Social Care Act came in 2012, and what this did was introduced a greater level of marketisation, so that private companies, which we already had a degree of, suddenly have come to the forefront. This means that there's some new terminology and there's a whole new structure. The change has been that the providers that were preferred, which were generally NHS, are now up against any qualified, and this means that private companies can bid on the same contracts as the NHS. So what we have seen is that any major contract that has been forced to go out to tender because the law has said that it must, has been won by the private sector. We have seen no NHS organisation win large contracts. In Staffordshire, the largest contract to date has just gone out to tender. It's worth £1.2 billion and it's for cancer care and end-of-life services. That's 5% of the total NHS budget, which is potentially going to go out to a private company to decide. I thought it was very interesting that we're talking about secrecy and a Dracula strategy, which actually applies very much here. This is something which, from the information that we've managed to gather, has been going on for about 2 years. The discussion of the idea has been going on for 2 years, and yet the tender process was only announced sort of publicly about 3 months ago, and that the deadline for submitting bids, that's from both the private sector and the NHS, is about to close in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. So for something that's been in discussion for a number of years, they've not given much time for people to think of the solution. So we have also found that there's been very little information about this. There's been very little public consultation. They say they've done one, but there's been no option to submit comments to a website. And apparently they may have spoken to a few hundred people. Now I'm going to run through a few statistics. The population that this covers is 800,000 people. And the tender value being £1.2 billion, and it's split between the cancer care at almost 700 million, and the end of life at almost, 500 million, which gives you the 1.2 in total. So that means that £1,500 per person, of which we estimate that £477 would be management costs and fees. So if this is going to go out to the private sector, that's 1/3 of that money potentially is up for grabs for them to play with, and a large portion of that will obviously be profit. So we're very concerned that what we're going to see is this top slicing of our NHS money, that rather than it being reinvested into our public service, is going to go over into tax havens and whatever else. So our campaign, obviously, I've got some information and I can pass that around, and I have a petition as well. And I'd very much like for people to sign it and to spread the word about the campaign. We've also started to do a little bit of campaigning on the TTIP, because again, the NHS, in relation to that, because of this degree of marketisation that's come in, is actually very much at risk from TTIP. Because the private companies have already got their hooks in, and with the opening up that we've already heard, they're going to start saying, well, no, the whole of that service is up for grabs. So we'll no longer even be able to stop some of these through the campaigns. It won't happen. The law that we've got at the moment, which has helped push this through, and the bill, is based on competition law, which means that even if a private sector lose a bid, so some of these contracts have already gone out, they've automatically been challenged, as we've heard. They just challenge it straight away. They say, no, you can't do it more cost effectively than we can do it. So again, it gets challenged, and then it goes back to the private sector. And we're very worried that with this, there is a high risk of that. But the problem with the secrecy has meant that actually most of our NHS organisations are on the back foot, because the private companies are already there, they're already producing, their bids to go forwards, and we're very worried that actually we're not going to have very much time to turn this around. So I think that's all I have to say really on that. But yeah, if you would support the campaign, we'd be grateful. And certainly there are lots of other NHS campaigns going on, and I know that in terms of TTIP, I know that the Keep Our NHS public group in South Warwickshire have been campaigning on TTIP for a number of months now. And certainly getting that message out and being really simple and clear about this is about money, this is only about money. And people don't like that. And specifically with the NHS, in terms of having something that everybody can get around, in terms of, obviously you mentioned the nuclear power as being something that unanimously united Germany, the NHS possibly could be something that could unanimously unite the UK. And certainly there are petitions saying exclude it, which is brilliant, and we need to do that at the very least. But perhaps it will be something that people will see, well, that's just one example of the threat that we're facing. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's a really, really good example of how we can try and build this campaign and link in all of those different aspects.